Okay, in this video we're going to look at task 3 and task 4 of component 1. So task 3 is about the actual creation of your user interface, and task 4 is looking at reviewing that and referring to the user requirements. So the marking criteria, if we focus on the mark band 4, we need to have a comprehensive application of user interface development, and we evidence that through fully appropriate use of design principles with fully effective use of layout, white space and consistency, fully appropriate use of navigation methods with fully accurate reference to the project brief, and fully appropriate consideration of user experience and accessibility needs with fully accurate reference to the project brief. So what this is, if I could summarize this is saying you need to design something that's consistent, you need to design something that's easy to use, and you need to design something that meets the user needs. And you refer to the project brief when you do design this, and certainly when you review it for task 4. Now this is an example of a student's work that is distinction. This is from a task that was done in 2014. A completely different style of project, but you can see that they've got this consistent layout. So the logo is in the top left, they've got clear headings, the images are clear, they're using borders. In the middle you can see they've got some information, they've made use of white space as well, so they've kept things consistent. On the left side we've got our navigation, home, bike information, special events, services. We've got the arrow to go to the next screen, and then we've got at the bottom, we've got the accessibility features where you can change the font size. You've got text to speech, you've got the magnifying, so that's to zoom into the images and text, and you've got the home button to take you back to the main screen. Now once you design the first screen, you can just right click and copy it 4 times, or 3 more times shall I say, and then you've got your 4 screens. That way then you don't have to individually create each one, and then what you do is you just edit those screens to meet the needs of the user. Special events, you can see here again the same consistent layout. One thing you will notice is that the bottom right where you've got your accessibility features, they're on all of the screens, and we've also got the arrows now, the back and forward arrow, whereas in the main page we only had the forward arrow. On the right side you can see that the images have been clearly laid out, making use of those borders. The language that's used is appropriate, it's clear, it's easy to use, it's the same consistent layout but also color that's used. And then in the last screen, this is the form. You can see that the form has been laid out quite nicely. They've made things stand out, so you can see there's a button, there's a submit button there. They've underlined the text, they've made the text bold, they've clearly aligned the form. I certainly think there's further improvements that could have been made to this form. Now the form itself doesn't have to work, but you can certainly tweak a few things within there. You can mention about some form of confirmation when the form has been submitted. So the key tips looking at this example is the consistent layout, so making sure that all of our screens are the same. We don't want one menu to look different in another screen. It's easy to use the navigation, it's on the left hand side, and it also tells you which section you're on. So if we look at this particular screen, we're on the services offered, and it's also highlighted and active within the navigation. The images have been carefully placed, and they have appropriate spacing, so they've made good use of spacing, although you can see that the 2 images here, the spacing could be improved slightly better. The logo is in a consistent place, as well as the social media, so the Facebook and the Instagram icon, and then the accessibility features, as I mentioned before, again is in the same place in every single screen and is very, very consistent within there. Now the examiner gave this student the following feedback. They said that it's fully appropriate use of design principles with fully effective use of layout. So they've said they've met these criteria. It's fully appropriate, so they've made use of the navigation methods, and they've accurately referenced the project brief, and also they've considered the user experience and the accessibility features. So they've kind of made all of that. And then the examiners added some further notes in terms of evidencing this. So the learner developed their user interface for all 4 screens. So you must have 4 screens. The screens are fully appropriate. The layout is consistent and it's fully effective. All of the slides or screens having the same layout. It makes use of white space. The screen headings are consistent, so you're using appropriate headings. It's using the same font size. That's important. You don't want one heading to be smaller than another heading, so you need to have that consistency. You also need to have that consistency with colors that you use as well, so the colors that they've used is appropriate and it's readable. And then the languages and images are used appropriate for the user needs as well. It's clear, the accessibility features. And they've really made consideration of the user experience and trying their best to ensure that the user doesn't have to look around for things like the navigation, things like key bits of information or images and so on. Task 4, again, up to 12 marks. For this task, what you are doing is you're applying lines of reasoning on how the user interface meets the user requirements and ease of use. So you're explaining everything you've done, all the design principles, how it meets the user requirements and how the screens are easy to use. You're referencing things like accessibility features, design principles, and then finally you're identifying further areas of development to the user interface as well. Now this student, as you can see, they've used the following headings. So they've written an overview of it. So they've talked about the user requirements, and I think it's really important for us to go back to task 1 and really think, what were some of the user requirements? What did I need to create? How long did I have to create it? What was my budget? So their requirements they've highlighted here. So they've talked about the cycling store. They've said that they've got 10 weeks, a budget of 16,250, and they've kind of highlighted what they need to do in terms of each week. So how the 10 weeks were split. So they've talked about the design being 4 weeks, the development being 5 weeks, the review being 1 week, and they've then explained how they've made the user interface simple. So they've used navigation, they've made use of white space, they've made sure that they've used arrows to kind of make it easy to go from one screen to another. They've used breadcrumbs to highlight what screen they're on. So you remember I mentioned earlier that the screen they're on is highlighted bold in the navigation menu, so that tells the user where they are in terms of the navigation. They've kind of justified a little bit in terms of the green and red color arrows. So green is about positivity going forward, red's going back. So that's an interesting explanation of it. They've talked about, again, consistency in every screen. They've talked about how the text and images they've placed in every single screen mirrors each other, so that ensures consistency. On here, they have further expanded in terms of the text and the information they've used. They've talked about making sure the text is large enough to read and clear to see, making sure that it's visible. They've referenced again accessibility feature, making sure it's visible in a consistent place. The next heading they've done is ease of use. So this is how easy and practical it is to use the screens. So they've incorporated simple and minimalistic look, but also making it especially easy to use for families and people with accessibility needs. They've said it's easy for young people to use as well. So you've got to really look, who's your target audience, and the design that you've created, does it cater for them? Is it easy for them to use? Does it use appropriate language? They've again talked about the white space and how they've utilized it. And then within here, they've again mentioned about breadcrumbs and how that is easy to use, how that tells the user where they are. And you can read the other bits. If you pause the video, you can read some of the other bits within the video. Here, they've emphasized the font size they've used for the headings, for the text. And in terms of their design principles, they've used appropriate contrast and color schemes, making sure that the text is clearly visible. They've mentioned they've used simple and straight to the point text. And they've also kind of really carefully thought out where they would put all of that information. So if you pause this video, you can see that they've kind of clearly explained and justified each bit. There is a lot of text for this, but I think some of that text is being repeated a couple of times. We could certainly condense that. This one's really important, the accessibility features they've used. So they're changing the text size, the magnifier, the text to speech. So all of these are really important accessibility features, and they've explained clearly why they've used it, how it caters to the needs, how it caters to the user requirements. So anything you've used within your design, you need to really kind of, this is the bit where you're actually showing off your project, the things you've done. In terms of improvements they've said, so in my opinion, I believe that there are a few elements I can improve when designing the user interface. I believe that I could improve the overall color scheme, could make it more simple, could have added a help button, they could have decluttered the screen as well. Now the strengths and weaknesses of the user interface should focus on the following: how well the user requirements have been met. So you look at the user requirements, how well have they been met? The suitability for purpose and audience, so how suitable is your user interface? How easy is it to use? Does it meet the audience's needs? The accessibility features you've included. And then finally, how effectively the design principles have been met. So you need to include each of these headings so that you have an area to discuss, and you're always evidencing and referencing with screenshots, because that gives you more points to discuss and talk through. Feedback for this, again, fully developed, well developed, wide range of fully improved. So we know quite clearly that it's fully developed because it's got 10 marks. So the learner has produced a report that provides largely appropriate lines of reasoning on how the user interface meets the user requirements and the ease of use. They've identified the strengths and weaknesses of the user interface and a range of improvements that could be developed further. So I feel like the improvements wasn't enough. I think they could have added more. The learner has used headings to comprehensively review each section. Absolutely they have. Those headings are important for task 4. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I felt like that area could have been improved a little bit more. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some key bits of information